You ever get that? Like an itch you can't scratch, something gnawing at the back of your brain, telling you something ain't right? That's how it began for me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my heart hammering, staring into the darkness of my apartment, convinced I wasn't alone. But I always was, or at least that's what I told myself. But then the little things started happening. My front door was unlocked in the mornings, even though I knew I locked it at night. My fridge would be open. My keys weren't where I left them. I chalked it up to forgetfulness, stress, whatever. But deep down, I knew something was off. And then I saw him. He wasn't some ghostly figure. He was a man, flesh and blood, standing in my room at 3 a.m., watching me sleep. I saw him just as my eyes fluttered open. He was standing so still, so goddamn still, like he belonged there. And when I sat up, he moved. Slow, deliberate, and he smiled. Then he walked out of my apartment like he had every right to be there. I barely slept after that. I changed the locks the next morning. I bought a security camera and pointed it straight at my bedroom door. I called the police, but they didn't take it seriously. No signs of forced entry, no threats, no crime. Maybe you forgot to lock up, they said. Maybe it was just a bad dream. But it wasn't a dream, and it didn't stop. The first time I checked my camera footage, my stomach dropped. At exactly 3:03 a.m., my bedroom door opened. Slowly. He stepped inside, just barely visible in the dim light. And then he stood there, watching me. For 10 whole minutes, he didn't move, not an inch. Then, just as slowly, he turned around and walked out. I showed the footage to the cops. They still didn't care. Maybe an ex with a key, they asked. Maybe you let someone in and forgot. They were useless. I was on my own. So I did everything I could. I installed a deadbolt. I set up motion detectors. I even started sleeping with a knife under my pillow. But none of it mattered. Because he always got in. Some nights I'd wake up and feel it. The presence. I wouldn't open my eyes. I was too afraid. But I knew he was there. My skin would prickle. The air would feel different. Heavy. I could hear my own heartbeat, fast and frantic, in the silence. And then, after what felt like forever, I'd hear it. The soft creak of my bedroom door closing. I stopped sleeping. I started staying up all night, sitting in my bed with my back against the wall, knife in hand, waiting. I told my landlord. He said I was imagining things. I begged him to change the locks. He refused. And then, one night, I wasn't asleep when he came in. I heard the doorknob turn. My breath caught in my throat. I gripped the knife so tight my knuckles ached. The door opened, just a crack. And then, ever so slowly, he stepped inside. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just watched. He stood there, same as always, staring at me, studying me. But this time, I was ready. The knife slashed through the air, but he was faster. He bolted, crashing through my apartment like a wild animal. I chased him, adrenaline drowning out my fear. But by the time I reached the front door, he was gone. I moved out the next day, left everything behind, didn't even go back for my stuff. I just ran. But sometimes late at night, I wake up and feel it, that same old feeling, like someone is watching me, and I wonder, did I escape? Or is he still out there, waiting for me to fall asleep again? I don't know what I was expecting when I first stumbled upon the lot. Something was always pulling me back, like a magnet that I couldn't shake, a call I couldn't resist. Maybe it was my own curiosity, or maybe it was something more sinister, something that had been waiting for me to find it. Either way, I had to go back. It all started the way I told you, a wrong turn on an otherwise uneventful drive home. But the second I stepped into that empty lot, I knew something was wrong. The trees were dead, the sky was clear, but everything about it felt like it was holding its breath. A feeling of weight hung in the air. Even now, after all these years, I can still remember it as clearly as I remember my name. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was just an overactive mind playing tricks on me. But then, as I sat there in my car, staring at the barren land, something deep inside me told me to leave. The radio flickered to life with nothing but static, and that's when I heard it, the voice, the whisper that crawled under my skin, so faint but clear. You're not supposed to be here. I left that night fast, too fast. I couldn't get out of there quickly enough, but it haunted me. I couldn't get it out of my head, no matter what I did. That place, that whisper, it all felt too real. And no matter how many times I drove the same roads, I couldn't find it again. The lot had vanished, like it had never existed at all. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that somehow I was tied to that place. And so I kept searching. Every weekend I drove those same winding roads, hoping, praying that I would find it again. Nothing. No matter where I went, it wasn't there. But one night, something changed. It was late, too late, and I was driving home after spending the night at a friend's house. The roads were empty, the kind of quiet that only comes with the dead of night. As I drove, I wasn't really thinking about the lot anymore. It had become a distant memory, something that had started to feel more like a dream than reality. Then I turned a corner, and there it was. I couldn't believe my eyes. The lot, just sitting there in the middle of nowhere. The dead trees, the empty stretch of land, it was all exactly the same as I remembered. But this time, something was different. There was a coldness to the air, like I was walking into a trap. I wasn't sure how, but I knew this wasn't a coincidence. It had found me again. I pulled over, my hands shaking as I turned off the engine. The radio flickered to life with nothing but static once more, and my heart started to race. The whisper came again, low and chilling. You shouldn't have come back. But this time, it wasn't just a whisper. It felt like a warning, a threat that hung in the air, thick and heavy. I wanted to leave. I wanted to get back in my car and never look back. But something stopped me. I don't know what it was, curiosity or some sick sense of needing to know what the hell was going on, but I stepped out of the car anyway. And that's when it happened. The trees, which had once been lifeless, began to move. No wind, nothing to explain it. Just the trees, swaying, creaking, like they were alive. And in the distance, I thought I saw something. A figure, standing at the edge of the lot, just watching me. I froze. My body went cold. The figure wasn't moving. It wasn't doing anything. It was just there, watching me. I tried to move, to walk back to my car, but my legs felt heavy, like I was stuck in place. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were behind me at first, soft and deliberate, like someone was walking in time with my own steps. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, that I had been standing out in the cold too long and my mind was playing tricks. But then the voice came again, clear as day. Leave, now. I didn't need to be told twice. I ran back to the car, heart pounding, and slammed the door shut behind me. I threw the car in gear and sped out of there like a bat out of hell. The whole way home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, watching me. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I half expected to see that figure standing in the road behind me. That night, I barely slept, and the next day I did the only thing I could think to do. I went back. But when I reached the lot, it was gone again. No dirt patch, no trees, just the road, empty and winding as always. I drove around in circles for hours trying to find it again. It was like it had never been there. Weeks went by. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The voice, the figure, the trees. It all felt like I was losing my grip on reality. And no matter what I did, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was coming. Something was watching me. One night, I thought I saw it again. The figure, standing outside my window, watching me from the darkness. But this time, I wasn't going to run. It's hard to explain what happened that day. Hell, it's hard to even talk about it now without feeling that same sense of dread clawing at the back of my mind. But I think it's time. Maybe if I finally talk about it, I'll stop feeling the weight of it all pressing down on me. Maybe it'll help me understand what happened. I was 24 at the time, living in a small town on the edge of nowhere. My buddies and I had always been into exploring, looking for abandoned places, old factories, or anything that had a story. You know the type. We weren't doing it to be reckless, just to scratch that itch of curiosity. One day, we heard about an old, long-abandoned building deep in the woods, near a riverbank. The locals always talked about it with a mix of suspicion and disdain, but no one ever went near it. Too dangerous, they said. Too many accidents. The kind of place people were better off forgetting. So naturally, we decided to check it out. It wasn't hard to find. We were used to wandering off the beaten path. The building itself was deep in the woods, shrouded by overgrown trees and thick brush. We parked our cars about a mile out and started hiking in. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon by the time we reached it, casting long shadows on the crumbling structure. The building was massive, even though most of it had collapsed in on itself over the years. I could tell from the way it loomed that it had once been something impressive. Maybe a factory, maybe an old warehouse. I didn't care to find out. We just wanted to explore. The first thing that struck me was the silence. There was no wind, no birds, nothing. Just dead air. It felt like the world around us had stopped. We pushed open the rusty metal door, the hinges creaking in protest, and stepped inside. The inside was even worse than I'd imagined. There were piles of debris everywhere, rusted metal beams hanging loosely from the ceiling. But there was something else, too. A strange, almost suffocating smell that hit me the moment we walked in. I wasn't sure what it was at first. It wasn't the smell of mold or rot, although there was that too. No, it was more like a thick metallic odor. Blood, maybe, or something worse. I shrugged it off at the time. Probably just some old pipes or decaying material, I told myself. We pressed on. The building was a maze. We wandered deeper, finding ourselves in long, narrow hallways lined with old doors that led to empty rooms, some of them filled with nothing but broken furniture and trash. But as we moved farther in, I started noticing something odd. Graffiti. But not the usual scribbles or gang signs you'd expect. These were different. They looked like symbols, cryptic things that didn't make sense. A few seemed like they were hastily painted over, as if someone had tried to cover them up. I asked one of my friends about it, but he just laughed and shrugged it off. Kids, man, they get bored and make shit up. But the deeper we went, the more I felt like we were being watched. It was a strange sensation, a prickling on the back of my neck that I couldn't shake. Then we found the basement. It wasn't a typical basement. It was more like a lower level, a pit beneath the rest of the building. The stairs creaked under our weight as we descended, and the air grew colder with every step. At the bottom, we found a large room with low ceilings. The walls were lined with old, rusted machinery and broken tools, but there was something off about the room. Something wrong. The lights from our flashlights flickered as we stepped into the center of the room. That's when I saw it. There was a door at the far end, but it wasn't like the others. It wasn't rusted or broken. It was pristine, almost as if it had been untouched for years. But there was something odd about it. It didn't seem to belong there. It looked newer. I don't know how to explain it, but everything about that door screamed, "Don't open it." But of course we opened it. Behind it was a hallway. It wasn't long, just a few feet really. But as soon as we stepped inside, something changed. The air thickened, the temperature dropped, and the smell that had been lingering in the building turned sharp, almost metallic. It was the kind of smell that makes your stomach twist and your skin crawl. Something wasn't right. We walked down the hallway, our footsteps echoing off the walls, and then at the end of the hall, we saw it. A small, almost perfectly square room. The walls were covered in something, like dried paint, but it didn't look like paint. It was darker, almost black. And the floor, I wish I could forget what was on that floor. It was like a thick layer of something sticky, something viscous. Blood? I don't know, but I could feel it sticking to my boots as I stepped into the room. I could feel my breath start to quicken. Something was wrong. I tried to back up, but my legs wouldn't move. It was like something was pulling me forward. I don't know how to describe it, but I felt trapped. My mind was screaming at me to leave, to get the hell out of there, but my body wouldn't listen. Then I heard it. A low whisper, like a breath against my ear. At first I thought it was one of my friends, but when I turned around, no one was there. And then it hit me. It wasn't just a whisper, it was a voice. The voice was clear now, coming from all around me, and it wasn't speaking to me directly, it was speaking to something else. My mind snapped, and I ran. I ran without thinking, pushing past my friends as they shouted after me. I don't know how I found my way out, but I did. When I burst out into the open air, I could finally breathe again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that voice in my head. I kept seeing that room, the black walls, the sticky floor, the whispers. I knew I had stumbled across something I shouldn't have. And now, it won't leave me alone. This one's a little hard to talk about, but I've never been able to shake it. It was back in the summer of '99 when it happened. I was 26 at the time, fresh out of college, trying to get my bearings in life. I didn't have much of a social life, to be honest, but I found solace in hiking. The kind of solitary hikes that let you clear your mind, think about everything and nothing. One weekend, I decided to take a solo trip up to the Appalachian Mountains. It wasn't anything too crazy, just a weekend hike, a couple of days to reset. The weather was perfect, cool, crisp, and clear. The trail I picked was a moderately difficult one, known for its breathtaking views and isolation. That's why I loved it. The first day went by without a hitch. I climbed up through the trees, stopping to take pictures and enjoy the silence. There weren't many people on the trail that day, just a few others scattered around, but no one too close. As the sun started setting, I made camp at a secluded spot near a stream. It was perfect. I'd pitched my tent, made a quick meal, and settled in with a book, enjoying the serenity. But then the sounds started. At first I thought it was just the rustling of leaves in the wind, but the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. Footsteps. Someone was walking around my campsite. Not very far away, just close enough that I could hear them, but not see them. I stood up, walking toward the edge of the campsite, trying to make out what was going on. Nothing. Just the woods. No one was there. I told myself it was nothing, maybe an animal or another hiker passing through. But the feeling lingered. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt like I was being watched. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those footsteps again. But when I looked outside, nothing. I kept hearing that sound, like someone was pacing around the perimeter of my camp. The next morning, I packed up early and hit the trail. I didn't want to stay another night out there, not with that feeling gnawing at me. I kept walking, trying to shake the sense of unease that followed me. But the further I went, the more I felt something wasn't right. I started noticing strange things along the trail. Broken branches, footprints that didn't belong to me, odd marks on the trees. It wasn't until midday that I saw him. I was crossing a narrow bridge when I noticed someone walking ahead of me, off in the distance. He wasn't on the trail, but he was heading in the same direction I was. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. I picked up my pace, getting closer, but he just kept walking, never looking back. When I finally caught up to him, I stopped dead in my tracks. The man was wearing a weathered old jacket, ragged jeans, and a strange hat, one of those wide-brimmed hats you'd expect to see on a cowboy. His back was to me, but something about him felt off. I couldn't see his face. "Hey!" I called again, a little louder this time. He didn't turn, didn't acknowledge me at all. Something about the way he stood there made my stomach turn. It was like he was waiting for something or someone. Maybe it was just me, but I had this horrible feeling that I was in danger. He was too still, too quiet. I took a step forward, and that's when he finally moved. But not in a normal way. It was slow, too slow. His head turned, and when he looked at me, I froze. His eyes were wide, staring at me like he could see straight through me. He didn't say a word. He just stood there watching me. Something told me to run. Without thinking, I turned and started sprinting down the trail, heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop until I reached the main ranger station hours later. When I turned around, there was no sign of the man. But that night, when I returned to my car, I found something strange. There was a note under my windshield wiper. It simply read, "I've been watching you." I never went back to those mountains. I never used to believe in things like this. I always thought it was just the stuff of campfire stories or late night horror films. But then it happened to me. It was just a regular evening in early autumn. The weather had that crisp chill to it, the kind that makes you want to stay inside and curl up with a good book. I had just moved into a small house on the outskirts of town. It was an older place, nothing fancy, but it was quiet, and that's all I needed. I was alone that night. My wife was out visiting her sister, and the kids were staying over at their grandparents'. I remember the house felt unnervingly quiet. There were no sounds from the street, no cars passing by. It was just still. Around midnight, I was sitting on the couch, watching TV. The house was dark except for the light from the screen. Suddenly, I heard a noise, a knock, at the door. It wasn't the kind of knock you expect when someone's visiting. It was fast, like a frantic tapping. 3 knocks in quick succession. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone, and we lived in a pretty isolated area. I wasn't expecting any visitors at that hour. Maybe it was a prank? I tried to brush it off and told myself it was just my imagination. But then the knocking came again, louder this time. 3 more knocks. I got up, walking cautiously toward the door. Through the peephole, I saw nothing. No cars parked outside, no figure standing on the porch, just darkness. My mind raced. Maybe it was someone in trouble, maybe a neighbor. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. The porch was empty. No one was there. But as I stepped outside, I noticed something strange on the ground. Fresh footprints, leading from the sidewalk to my door. The prints were small, almost childlike, but they were too deep, as if someone had been standing there for a long time. I checked the rest of the yard, but I didn't see anyone. No one in sight. That's when I heard it again. A voice, soft at first, then louder. "Help me." I spun around. No one. The voice was coming from the backyard. I don't know why I did it, but I grabbed a flashlight and headed around back. The wind picked up as I stepped onto the grass, my heart pounding. The voice called out again, "Help me, please." I shined the light around the yard, scanning every corner. And then, just behind the shed, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure, a small hunched shape, crouched on the ground. I couldn't see it clearly at first, but as I approached, it slowly turned its head toward me. It was a woman. No, it wasn't. It couldn't be. Her eyes were wide open, staring directly at me, but her face was distorted, unnatural. Her mouth hung open in a grin that stretched too far. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I ran. I didn't look back. The next day, I had the locks changed, and I never saw anything like it again. But I still don't know who or what that thing was. It never made a sound after that night. Just a distorted grin, a voice that wasn't quite human, and a deep, unsettling silence that followed me home. I've been through a lot in my life. I've seen some things that would make your skin crawl. But there's one place, one moment, that still haunts me to this day. It happened years ago, when I was still young, still full of that reckless curiosity you only get when you think you're invincible. I didn't realize back then that some places are meant to stay forgotten. It started innocently enough. I had a group of friends who loved to go hiking in the woods near our town. We weren't looking for anything paranormal or strange, just some fresh air and an escape from our boring little lives. But one day, we found something we shouldn't have. We'd been hiking along this overgrown trail when we stumbled upon an old rusted gate. It was barely visible through the thick trees, hidden behind a wall of ivy and tangled branches. The gate itself was falling apart, like it hadn't been touched in years. But what caught my attention wasn't the gate. It was the fact that there was no sign, no indication of where it led. There was no reason for it to be there. We pushed through the gate, curiosity taking over. The path beyond was even more overgrown, as if it hadn't been walked on in decades. The trees were denser here, and the air felt thick, heavier than normal. But we didn't think much of it. We were too young, too carefree to see the signs. We kept walking, laughing and joking about how no one had ever found this place before. As we ventured deeper, the trees seemed to close in on us. The light from the outside world dimmed, and the sounds of the forest, birds, animals, even the wind, faded into a muffled silence. It wasn't long before we came across an old stone building. It was small, barely standing, with ivy crawling up its sides. The roof was partially collapsed, and the windows were shattered, but there was something oddly compelling about it. It was as if it had been waiting for someone to find it, like it had been forgotten by the world. One of my friends, Chad, was the first to step inside. He was always the daring one, always looking for a thrill. He was also the first one to stop dead in his tracks when he saw what was inside. I'm not sure what we were expecting, but it wasn't this. The room was empty, save for piles of old papers and books scattered across the floor. But what really caught our attention was the smell. It wasn't the musty, earthy smell you'd expect from an abandoned place. No, this was something more. Pungent, like old blood and decay. Something had been here, and it hadn't been clean. We all stood there, frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. Then Chad picked up a book from the floor, his eyes scanning the cover. It was old, worn, the pages yellowed with age, but when he opened it, I saw his face go pale. "Guys," he said, his voice shaky, "this doesn't make sense." He started reading aloud. The words didn't make any sense to me at first. They were jumbled, like a mixture of languages, but there was one part that stood out. "The gate opens to a place forgotten by time. The path will lead you to those who should not be found. Leave now, or you will never leave." We all laughed nervously, thinking it was just some stupid old superstition. But even as I laughed, something didn't feel right. The air was heavier now, thicker. The silence around us was unsettling, like the forest had stopped breathing. That's when we heard it. At first, it was a whisper, a soft, low murmur, almost like someone was calling us, but it was too far away to pinpoint. I tried to brush it off as the wind, but then the whisper turned into a voice. "Leave now." It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable, and it wasn't from any of us. My heart started pounding in my chest as we all turned to look at each other. Chad looked even more pale now. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice tight with fear. But it was already too late. As soon as we turned to leave, we saw something that stopped us dead in our tracks. The path we had walked in on was gone. The trees were different. The gate, gone. The forest was closed off as if it had shifted, rearranged itself while we weren't looking. The air was now freezing cold, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones and makes you feel like you'll never be warm again. I heard another whisper, this time much closer. "You shouldn't have come." It was clear now. We weren't alone. Someone was watching us. I felt it in the pit of my stomach, like a cold hand gripping my heart. We ran. We ran as fast as we could, but the woods twisted and turned, leading us deeper and deeper into a maze. No matter how fast we moved, we couldn't get any closer to the exit. The trees seemed to close in on us, forcing us into this never-ending loop. And then, just when I thought I couldn't run anymore, I saw it. A figure, a shadow in the distance, standing still in the middle of the path. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching us. The more I looked at it, the more it felt wrong. It wasn't human, not completely. Its limbs were too long, its shape too distorted, and its face, it didn't have one. Just darkness. I could hear my friends breathing heavily beside me, but I couldn't take my eyes off the figure. It was coming closer now, slow, deliberate steps. "Run!" I shouted, and we all turned and bolted. I don't remember much of the next few moments, just panic, adrenaline, and the sound of our frantic footsteps echoing through the trees. But somehow, by some miracle, we made it out. The woods opened up again, the trees parted, and we found ourselves back on the trail, breathless and disoriented. We didn't speak a word to each other on the way back to the car. We just drove straight back to town, like we were being chased. That place, it wasn't just a part of the woods. It wasn't some forgotten ruin. It was something older, something that should never have been disturbed. I've never gone back, and I'll never forget that feeling of being watched, the whisper in the woods, the thing that followed us. Some places are meant to stay forgotten, and some things, once they've seen you, will never let you go. Well, there you have it, 6 of the most chilling and unforgettable true stories that I could find. But the question remains, what do you think? Have you ever experienced something that left you questioning reality? A place that wasn't supposed to exist? A voice from the shadows that you couldn't explain? If you've got a story that's just as eerie, just as spine-tingling, I want to hear it. Drop your encounter in the comments below, and who knows, you could be featured in the next video. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new horrifying tale. Because believe me, there's always something darker lurking out there, waiting to be uncovered. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay safe. You never know what might be out there.